In this video, I want to break down some of the traits of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, influencers, people in the business space, at least that are on YouTube or they have podcasts or they're well known. And so I'm going to go through 5 in this video. And the purpose of this is to point out some things, to see that some people have some unique traits and there's some overlap in terms of similarities between all 5 of them. But let's evaluate some of these most influential people. So let's jump in with Alex Hormozi. One of the things you'll notice with him, if you've watched him for any amount of time, is that Alex is very direct. He's extremely direct. He's extremely concise. He's not above you. He's not below you. He's at a 3rd, 4th grade, speaking communication level. And one of the things that I think he's really extremely powerful in doing is reverse engineering and then chunking. So he'll take a concept that's very complex. Maybe it's a marketing framework, or maybe it's sales, right? And he'll take something very complex and he'll break it down and be like, if you do this, and then you do that, and you do this, you'll get this. And if you want this, you have to do this, and you've got to stack this. And he breaks everything out into really bite-sized pieces that are easy for people to understand. And so I call that chunking. His ability at chunking things up or down, breaking things apart, or reassembling them is extremely powerful. He has a way of simplifying complexity. And I think because Alex is so direct and genuine, and he is confident in the way that he expresses himself, he has a medium level of expression, I would say. He's not overly expressive with his body language, like some of the people we'll talk about in a second. He's not overly expressive with his tone. He kind of stays a little bit monotone. He will inflect to show some points and emphasis in certain places, but he has this subtle confidence that kind of forces you to lean in. It's like somehow he creates this aura of authority around himself. And so because of that, he comes off as very genuine. And so that's Alex in a nutshell. Next, I would contrast him with Russell Brunson. So Russell Brunson, the CEO of ClickFunnels, protege of Myron Golden. Myron Golden went to a bunch of his masterminds out in Boise, Idaho, and still does, I believe. So Russell, looking at him, if you've watched him for even 5 seconds, go watch a short of his or go watch a couple of his videos. He is so fast. I feel like when I listen to him or I watch his videos, I think I'm a pretty quick speaker. I'm a pretty quick follower. I'm not slow, but he has such a high level of energy, not just through his speaking rate, but watch his eyes and his inflections and his body and the way he moves and talks with his hands. He's extremely expressive. He's extremely expressive with his body and also with his tone. And so I think he's probably one of the highest energy entrepreneurs or influencers in the space that I can think of, except for somebody that's in a couple that I'll get to. Russell comes off as pretty genuine. I wouldn't say he's the most genuine. It does seem like he has a reserve. There's something that he's always holding back a little bit. If you've watched him for any period of time, you can kind of see this. It's he gives you 90%, but then it's there's 10% that feels hidden. Where with Alex Hormozi, I feel like if you put yourself in this mental situation with Russell Brunson, right, and you were to ask him a question, maybe it's on the verge of personal and professional. Alex is going to give you 150% truth. He's going to tell you his experience. He'd probably give you TMI, right? More than you even asked for. Russell would probably give you 90%. He's probably not going to give you that last 10%. That's how he feels to me. And I'm not sure where that comes from. Again, I would say that Russell speaks at that 3rd, 4th grade speaking level. One of the things that Russell's extremely powerful at, more so than just about anyone I've ever noticed, if you look at the rate at which he speaks, it's really surprising when he tells a story or he goes into an analogy, he can regain his track of thought so quickly. A lot of people, it's not as effortless for them. They get lost. They have a hard time picking up where they left off. And Russell's not old, but he's not exactly young. And so cognitively, he is quite an impressive person because his brain is going so fast and his mouth is going so fast, but they're in unison, it just blows me away how he can regain thought so clearly and pick up on where he left off and remember things from earlier in an hour-long interview. It's really surprising to me. So he's highly expressive with body and tone, 3rd grade speaking level, genuine. He's more polished and filtered, right? When you look at Gary Vee or Alex, they just have a level of unrefinement that there's some level of, that it's attractive in its own way. But Russell is more polished. And I think because he's polished, that's where that 10% of reserve kind of comes from for me, where I'm like, you feel like you're only going to get into that inner circle of being his best friend and get that 10%. Whereas like Gary Vee or Alex Hormozi, you know, they're going to tell you their life story, not over a beer, not over anything, but just at a conference. If you were to meet them, they would tell you everything and more. Okay, so we went over Alex, we went over Russell. Richard Branson is an interesting one. He is really perplexing and different because he's lower energy. He is expressive. I mean, he has some level of body language, some tonal inflection, but he's not nearly to the same extent as anybody else that's on this list. I would say for most of these like influencer type people, and especially him being like the OG entrepreneurial person that kind of, was the poster child for a long time of entrepreneurship. He is way less expressive in tone and body than a lot of these people. And what's interesting about him is there's something about his level of his calmness. He has this persuasiveness through his calm. It's like Alex Hormozi has like domain expertise in the way that he comes in, right? I mean, the guy's just huge. You already like trust him. He's like talking about food and business, and it's like in the same context, and it's like you already have trust for him because you're like, he's talking about going to the gym and whatever. It's like, you don't need to tell me that he goes to the gym. You don't need, and then it's like in the same vein, you don't need to tell me that he's built these businesses. It's like he has somewhat of a reputation that speaks for himself. He has this level of confidence that translates that, even if it's your first time watching him. And so for Richard, it's interesting because he has this calmness, and it kind of, with Alex, or Russell, I might, lean back, but with Richard, you kind of lean in. And you want to know more. It's engaging. You want to ask him stuff. It's like there's something about his calmness that forces you to lean in. And so they're both engaging in different ways, these people that are highly expressive and also Richard and being a little bit less expressive and more calm. But it's an interesting paradigm. His reservation is engaging. He still comes off as genuine, but there's something about his level of calmness and the lack of overexpression in tone, maybe when compared to someone like Russell Brunson, that is so powerful. And so Richard is an anomaly in this list, and I think he's interesting for that reason. So next is Gary Vee. As many of you know, I went to the same high school as Gary Vee, and so I relate to him really well. Growing up in New Jersey, having your guidance counselor tell you you'll be nothing and all these different things, I really relate to him. Now, obviously, I'm not of the same descent as he is heritage-wise, but he's so expressive and speaks with his hands. And his body language, you can read his facial expressions. A lot of times you'll see interviews where people are asking him a question, and you know what he's thinking because it's written all over his face. And for that reason, I think Gary is super genuine. There are things that I don't necessarily love about his personality, but that's not what this video is about. Like the cursing and all the stuff, I do agree with Myron. It's like it shows a lack of creativity because, curse words can kind of be a catch-all. They're not really super descriptive, and now it's more work for me to figure out what you mean for that thing in context because that word could mean any number of things. And so I don't love that, but he is very direct. He has that third grade speaking level. He's super, super expressive with body, with language, with tone. And he has heavy reliance on stories and analogies, which I really like. I would say that Russell does this as well, but Gary's really strong at doing this. And he's also high energy, extremely high energy. But there's something in Gary that comes off as extremely genuine in I would say, a different way than Russell. Again, I would say that Gary is like Alex Hormozi in terms of genuineness. You have this sense that if you were to ask him a question, he would tell you about his experience. He would give you some background story that's he's never told anybody before. He makes you feel like you're the only person in the room when he's speaking. There's something about him that there's just no reserve. What you see is what you get is what you see. And I really like that in Gary. So I would say that Gary and Russell are kind of similar, and Gary and Alex are kind of similar in different ways. So I thought that was interesting. Ed Mylett. Ed Mylett is the last person on this list here. This is going to be kind of controversial. There's a lot that I like about Ed Mylett. There's a lot that he does, which is great. There are some things about Ed that me personally, that I have a little pause with, and we'll go into that. So Ed Mylett is really strong in his use of analogies and stories. He leans on them a lot. He uses them in powerful, illustrative ways. I really like this about Ed. He'll take you into a story and he'll make you feel like you're there. And because this will kind of lead into what I'm about to talk about in a second, but he has this radio voice. So he has a really high level of expressive tone. When he's on stage, he'll shout and scream like Myron kind of will. And so he uses tone and he uses inflection to kind of create this aura of confidence. And I do like that. I find it engaging, especially when you overlay that with the use of stories and analogies. I would say for Ed, he's not as expressive with body language. Like, he certainly does use his hands and move around, but he relies more on tone and more on conversation and more on that radio voice, or as Christopher Voss would say, that FM DJ voice, more so than body language. This is where it's kind of controversial for me, and I don't mean to be inflammatory, but I just find Ed a little bit disingenuous. One of the things I would track this back to is if you watch any of his videos, again, I think some of that's the radio person, like having that radio voice come through. It just kind of, number one, that sets the tone. When someone speaks and inflects that perfectly, it's like I'm listening to Richard Hammond in Top Gear. It's like, again, his background was in radio, and it's like, it sounds like an infomercial. So that's number one. Number two is, I think there's a level of disingenuousness that comes from every time he introduces a guest. It's like, this is his favorite guest ever. It's the best person ever. It's the most qualified person ever every single time. And so it kind of lacks intentionality when every person's the best person ever, when every person's the most exciting ever. It loses its meaning. And so there are little things that he'll do like that make me feel like I'm not sure if what I'm seeing is what I'm getting with Ed. But that doesn't change the value in a lot of the stuff that he goes into detail on, a lot of the stories that he shares, and a lot of the power that are behind them. So I just wanted to point that out. That's something that I experience, and I would say that his energy is medium level. He's not too high, he's not too low, but this does change. When I've seen him at speaking engagements, he is extremely high energy. He really relies on tone and volume in order to convey an idea, which is so in contrast with Richard, right? Like Richard Branson. And this goes into the book Anti-Fragile, right? Like, actually, if you want people to listen better, you start whispering. Because when you start whispering, they have to lean in. And so Ed Mylett doesn't do this. And in order to get people more engaged, he'll start shouting and yelling. It's just another way of getting people engaged. Both are powerful. Richard Branson's paradigm is more interesting to me, just because I don't see it as frequently. I think a lot of these guys can get a little loud on stage. Alex Hormozi is kind of ho-hum, so is Russell, but definitely Gary and Ed get loud. Myron gets loud. And so I would say that Ed is medium energy. He's not super expressive with his hands and stuff, but he does use tone. So similarities. Something that I see across all of these people is that they speak at a third grade reading level, third, fourth grade communication level. Most of them are medium to high in expressiveness with tone. And all of them have some level of persuasiveness through conviction. But that conviction comes in two forms. So they're all persuasive to me because they have a level of conviction. But that conviction either comes in the form of expression. Think of Ed or Alex or Russell Brunson. Or in the case of Richard Branson, he's not as expressive, but it's this calmness that draws you in. It's this calmness that lets you know that, like, if he was driving my car or he was driving a boat, I'd be like, we're fine. If he was flying one of the Virgin planes and I was on it, I'd be totally cool, because he has this calmness that makes me feel his level of conviction in something. He doesn't have to force it to me the way that Ed and some of the others do. I'm not discounting their method. I'm just saying it's different. All of them have some level of persuasiveness in their approach because they have so much conviction. So I wanted to point these things out to you so you can notice them as you go to watch videos from these people and figure out how you implement some of these things into your life with your own personality and your own skills and traits. I hope this helps you, and I'll see you in the next one.